It's the morning of August 14th, 2007. I'm Michael Aron. This is the Rutgers project on the governors. We're focusing on the Byrne archive, and we're going to talk to Governor Byrne again today, continue our series of discussions with him, and flesh out some other aspects of his first term. Governor, last time we spoke, we talked an awful lot about the income tax and school funding. How else did you change New Jersey during your first term?
First of all, I'm going to correct one thing from last time, and that is, last time as I read it, I said I didn't like Bill Gormley, and that's totally erroneous. I do like Bill Gormley. I consider him one of my best friends. I did not like his position on the Pinelands, so we had that out a number of times. But despite it all, we remain and are good friends.
All right. The record stands corrected.
Good.
Let's talk about the big things that you think you accomplished in the first term.
In the first term. Let's start with what I don't get enough credit for, and that is building the sports complex. No question, it was Bill Cahill's idea. Really, it was Joe McCrane's idea, and they had Sonny well into it. But if I had lost the 1973 election, I don't think the sports complex would have been built. Charlie Sandman was my opponent, had no interest in building the sports complex and financing it. So I really think I was the sine qua non of getting the sports complex built. And we negotiated. Luke Hayden and Jimmy Zazzali were key in putting it together. And as I say, it was not my idea, but I brought it to fruition. Just like the income tax was not my idea, but I get a lot of credit for it.
And how do you feel the sports complex has played out?
Well, I would have. I think the sports complex is a different vision than I had. I had a sports complex vision where we had the stadium, the racetrack, the arena, and not much else. Now it's a madhouse up there, and it doesn't give me the picture postcard vision of New Jersey that I had envisioned.
When you say a madhouse, are you referring to Xanadu?
Xanadu, building, tearing this down, building that.
They're tearing the old stadium down and building a new stadium.
Yeah.
Tearing the arena down.
The arena will probably come down. It's a shame. It was a good arena. The only thing wrong anybody ever said was there were not enough luxury boxes, and you couldn't generate the cash. I think that all may catch up someday.
To what extent?
Tickets are getting more expensive. You got to pay to park. You got to pay to get the right to park now.
To what extent do you think the sports complex helped lift New Jersey's image? Yeah, I think Sonny Werblin had the concept of a megalopolis, which I can't pronounce, but it sounds good. And a megalopolis concept is valid, and the sports complex proved that. Also proved that New Jersey has some glamour. And I think the sports complex in Atlantic City have given New Jersey a kind of glamour, which also lets us appreciate things like the Pinelands and Princeton University and the other things which are not as glamorous but are just as New Jersey. I'm starting to get worried about whether New Jersey is too much of an attraction for people. This is 2007 now. I talk to mayors now. Mayors used to look for development in their towns, and now they're starting not to look for development. They used to worry about how many kids were in school and not in school. Now they just worry about how many cars are on the road. So we may have done too good a job. The state's too congested, is that what you're saying? It's a terrible state to try to get around these days. Not 2007.
Do you think that the new Newark Arena and the existing sports complex and the arena there, which is still active, can both coexist peacefully?
Well, we're going to see. I mean, that's an economic type of outcome, and I'm not sure. There are people I've talked to who might or might not run the sports complex, who think that the present arena can exist on its own, and attract the kind of events that are not basketball, football, hockey, and so on. I think that's a very real possibility, and the people who talk that way know what they're talking about. Whether all of these things put together, and every municipality is now building its own cultural center with a couple of thousand seats. So you got a lot of competition for the entertainment dollar. Now, I don't know. I'm worried about it.
Is there something else that comes to mind in the way of changing New Jersey?
Well, we did a lot of things. For instance, when I was in government, I was in Dick Hughes' cabinet as the Public Utility Commissioner and President. And at that time, we were subsidizing mass transit. It became a failure. We had what was known as a commuter operating agency, composed of the President of the Public Utility Commission, that the Commissioner of Transportation, a couple other people. And that wasn't working. We were just pouring money into it. And one of the things we did in our administration, with the leadership of Lou Gambasini, frankly, was to create a New Jersey Transit, which all operated the commuter railroads and the bus lines, and I think that's made a big difference. Now, I am also convinced that the only way to solve, as we speak here, the only way to solve the mass transit problem and the crowded problem is to run trains every 20 minutes. It's going to be a loss for several years while people get used to its reliability. But I think the only way to go in New Jersey, and we can build all the tunnels we want, but the only way to solve this problem is to run a train every 20 minutes. I can't get my wife to go to New York on a train because she can't get back. Because we go during the rush hour, but we come back 11 o'clock at night. If you miss the 11 o'clock train, it's a 12 o'clock train. And if you miss the 12 o'clock train, it's probably next morning. So we go to London every year, and we see that we can get down to the subway, and we can get a train within 7 or 8 minutes of the time we get on that platform. New Jersey has to adopt that mentality, or we're a loser. But we started it with the New Jersey Transit.
Gambasini was your transportation commissioner?
Not only that, but I got Lou Gambasini from the Port Authority. He was running PATH. And I had an interesting experience or two with PATH when I was running the Public Utility Commission, because I thought I had some jurisdiction over PATH, and Austin Tobin thought I did not. We had that out a couple of times. But anyway, the point is that Lou was a pro, and he's been recognized as a pro. And he was largely responsible for A, getting it passed, and B, getting it working.
Since you mentioned the creation of New Jersey Transit, do you want to expand more on PSE&G and negotiations?
with you're talking about transit now?
Yes.
Yeah. New Jersey, it was a difficult thing to get New Jersey Transit passed in the legislature. Senator Herbert was a leader in this. The laborers didn't like it because we were modifying their contracts and we were taking them sort of into the public sector. And it was a challenge to get the votes to get that passed.
Do you recall PSE&G's
I don't frankly, I don't remember.
They owned the bus line.
No, yeah, they owned the bus lines, and we had to buy them. And that was just a negotiation. That was not a big deal. It was a tough deal, but it was not a big deal. It had to happen.
I don't know how much longer I should tap you for the subjects of your accomplishments that first term, or whether I should just turn to some other subjects, but I'll let you keep going if you want to.
One of the first things we did in the first term is fulfill the promise to put government under glass. And the points I made in the campaign, don't forget I campaigned in '73 following the Watergate situation. So that we made certain promises, government under glass, financial disclosures, giving people greater access to the vote. And so we did that very early on in the first term. We got those things passed. And
when you say giving the public greater access to the vote, did you start postcard registration?
Sure. And before that, you wouldn't believe how cumbersome it was to get, to get people out the vote. We had to literally take the books from the county clerk's office and manually take them to a neighborhood and then knock at doors. I think we discussed this the last time, though.
The financial disclosure changes that you made, do you think that maybe financial disclosure has gone too far?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are people who will not take jobs because they don't want to go through this financial disclosure. If they forget something, it's a big deal. And somebody with a bunch of holdings, or with somebody managing the money, probably doesn't know what they have. I don't know what I have. I don't have much, but I don't know what I have these days. And I would hate to make a financial disclosure.
So was it wrong of you back then to
go
in that direction?
No, because that's what the public wanted. They wanted some confidence that people were not in government to make money, and I think it was right for the time. But now, first of all, everybody gets elected has enough money so they don't have to steal. Now you can't run for office without $500 million. So I think a lot of it has gone by.
Did you say $500,000? $500 million.
Yeah, $500 million. Yeah, has gone by, and people are discouraged when they have to make these extensive disclosures. And
what about public financing?
Hasn't really worked. Public financing has not really worked.
Just let me clarify, public financing of election campaigns.
Yeah,
yes.
Hasn't really worked because public financing doesn't give you enough money, and a lot of key people reject public financing, raise their own money without limits.
It worked for a while, didn't
it did. As a matter of fact, probably got me reelected, because when I ran for re-election, I wasn't given a chance, and if you're not given a chance, you don't raise money. So public financing was able to give me the kind of money to make a credible campaign out of it. That's not going to happen today. It's just not going to happen.
I think it happened up until Corzine.
May or may not have.
Now the legislature is experimenting with it in a couple of districts, 3 this time. You think that's a good idea?
Why not? But even there, even legislators, I mean, when you think of what it takes to run for state senate, think of how much money Cody raises when he runs for mayor. And Cody doesn't have to raise the money. People will vote for Cody because he's Cody and they know him. But that's everybody thinks that that's a monitor or a measure of how successful you're going to be. And it's just not true. I've said often that most of the money you put into a campaign is wasted. And it is. I said that to Corzine. He said, yeah, but he couldn't take a chance. No.
Do you approve of the recent ban on dual office holding for elected officials?
Not particularly. I think that it's abused, and if people are doing it just to pick up a pension, that's an abuse. But to have the assemblyman from the district in West Orange also be the mayor of West Orange has been very good for West Orange. And so from that standpoint, I would be opposed to taking him out of one of the offices. But on the other hand, it gives you a distorted view of either office. I mean, if you're mayor, you're wondering about does it conflict with your duties as a senator or vice versa.
So this is
I don't think it's as big a problem as the press does.
Okay. How about senatorial courtesy, another controversial practice that some people think should be done away with? What's your view?
If senatorial courtesy were practiced the way it was when it started, it wouldn't be bad. The way senatorial courtesy started in New Jersey was that a resident senator, and by the way, in those days, there was only one senator you had to deal with. Now there are sometimes 5 or 6. In the old days, if the one senator from that town objected, he had to stand up on the floor of the Senate. He didn't just not sign off. Stood up on the floor, said, I find this man to be personally objectionable. And that was good. I mean, in my day, Senator McKay did that to block the reappointment of Grover Richmond as Attorney General. They were both from Burlington County. But Senator McKay stood up on the floor and he said, I find Grover Richmond to be personally objectionable. Grover Richmond was not confirmed and Senator McKay was not reelected. And so there's this kind of responsibility to it. Now, you can say, I'm for you, and just not sign a piece of paper and you're dead. And that's a sneaky kind of senatorial courtesy.
Would you do away with it?
I would go back to the old days, because you're not going to do away with it, unless the court does away with it. And the court may eventually, although I don't think so. I've canvassed the court through other than the court, and there's not enough votes now to do away with it on that court. But if they went back, and this may be doable, if they went back to the old system of making you stand up on the floor, I think that would solve a lot of the problem.
Another thing that good government types are concerned about in New Jersey is the pay-to-play system. There's been some reform at the state level. There have been a few local reforms. How in need of reform is the system of people giving political contributions in winning state business?
I think buying your way into good grace is wrong. But I think it's gotten to the point where if you're politically active, you're disqualified by the pay-to-play concept. So I think we got to keep looking at that. We get hysterical
about things in New Jersey. In my day, everybody was hysterical about my using the helicopter. Now, today, everybody is saying, yeah, the governor might not have had this accident if he used a helicopter. You ought to use the helicopter more. It's safer. It's more efficient. It saves money. Entirely different from when they used it as a political. And, as I say, we get emotional about too many things in New Jersey.
You think we've gone overboard in some certain areas in terms
Sure.
of trying to police
Sure.
politics?
It's like, for instance, every time we get a big type of crime problem, we increase the penalties. I mean, that's the answer. We increase the penalty. And so we got thousands of people in jail because they smoked marijuana. And people are not ready to listen to a rational discussion of what the problem is and how you solve it. You don't solve any problem by taking the governor out of the helicopter.
One of your initiatives was to open New Jersey bond reviews to New Jersey rather than New York City law firms. How has that worked?
Well, there was no reason that New Jersey lawyers should be inferior to New York lawyers in any area. I think we can handle cases as well as New York. We can close a bond deal as well as the example I use is I have a law firm, and I think one time we bid on a bond issue, and we had some pretty good people working for us. Arthur Vanderbilt's our #1 bond guy, good lawyer, grandson of the Chief Justice. So they tell us we can't, we're not up to it. So they give it to a New York law firm where my son did it. He was then working for a New York law firm. And with all, my son is a very bright guy, but it's not a whole lot better than New Jersey. He's better, but not a whole lot better than some of the best New Jersey lawyers. So there was no reason to exclude New Jersey lawyers, and we changed it. But by the way, we are bonding too much. Now, I think that, and this is supposed to be a discussion of what we did, not what we want somebody else to do now. But I think that when we issue bonds in the state, we ought to have a way of paying for them. And to say, well, we're going to issue this bond, it's good for New Jersey, it's an investment, but even investments you pay for. Now we're saying it's an investment that's going to expand the economy, but we never expanded enough so that we've got the money to pay the bonds back. And we don't realize that yet. We keep doing it, we keep getting into debt, we keep not paying it.
It could be said that one of the consequences of government under glass is all this extra scrutiny that politicians are subjected to, tabloid-style scrutiny, their private lives. In the case of the current governor, his emails back and forth with Carla Katz, his ex-girlfriend and a union leader. Is that something that also has gone too far in another direction, this idea that everything should be transparent?
Well, I think everything government related should be transparent. That's why Rutgers has every paper. Rutgers has my papers, my personal papers, official papers the state has. But I did not edit the personal papers when I sent them down here. On the other hand, you know, they don't have to know who you're rooting for in the Yankees game tonight, and the things that are totally irrelevant. Now, how much of that judgment the governor makes himself is open to question. I think he's entitled to a private life, and there you go.
How much has it changed from your day, the degree of scrutiny?
It's much more in terms of how much you get into somebody's private life. And of course, with McGreevy's private life becoming a fascination for everybody, you're seeing an appetite for it, which has to be curbed.
Why?
Because you're entitled to a really private life. You're entitled to.
Another reform, the lieutenant governor to take over when the governor is forced out or disabled or whatever. What's your view of that?
I was against it from the beginning. I was disappointed that it passed because we had in New Jersey a focused responsibility for the governor. And picking a lieutenant governor now, you're going to have all of the influences which don't help, like geographics and race and religion and all this other stuff. It's not going to help get New Jersey to be a better state.
There's an argument that it'll open up more opportunity for women and minorities at the highest levels.
Well, those opportunities should come in running a woman for governor, not giving her a bone by putting her on the ticket as a lieutenant governor. And we ought to have more women candidates for governor.
What's the political impact of having a lieutenant governor? How does it change the dynamics?
It's just more compromising. You got this guy from North Jersey, that guy from South Jersey.
How about once they're elected?
Well, lieutenant governors have given governors problems in some states in the past. Who's the lieutenant governor of New York now? You don't know, and since Mary Ann Kupchak, nobody has remembered. So they only come to mind when they do something to harass the governor.
Let's talk about some other things. When you came into office, was there an energy crisis in America?
Yeah, we had a gas crisis. We had not an even. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was governor-elect, I was driving my own car, and I was driving around, I realized I was running out of gas. And I stopped at one of the state police substations and asked them if they'd give me a gallon of gas till I got to a real gas station. And they did. But yes, we had it. We did the odd even.
New Jersey did that?
We did. We were one of the first states to do it. And it worked. It solved the gas crisis.
People with odd numbered license, the first number or the last number could go one day and even number the next.
Right. And it worked. And you had to be imaginative and do something. And I did have Dick DeCourt, who had been, I think, the Republican majority leader for Cahill, and was very helpful in my administration.
What was he? What was his? He was.
He became sort of the energy czar for a while when we had that kind of problem.
Where was he from?
And he's Bergen County, and he has a lot of credibility on both sides of the aisle, so that helped.
Offshore drilling, was that an
And
issue?
by the way, that emphasizes an even broader point, and that is there was a lot more tolerance of party in those. I mean, you appointed somebody who was a Republican, you could get him confirmed. There was not the insistence that political chits be transferred and observed. Anyway, it was better from the climate standpoint.
It was easier to bring a Republican into your cabinet, you're saying?
I had Republicans in my cabinet. Jimmy Sheeran was one. He turned Democrat. He saw the light. But
He was your insurance commissioner.
he was my insurance commissioner. And there were a number of Republicans. Fuller Lampe was a famous Republican.
Agriculture.
Fun guy.
Was offshore drilling an issue when you were in your first
Offshore drilling was an issue, but it wasn't. I mean, Public Service had proposed a offshore drilling site off Atlantic City, and I think they realized. First of all, I was against it, and they realized that they should be against it too. And so when I said that we're not going to do it under any circumstances, I think they were happy. They made a mistake. I corrected it for them. They appreciate it.
How did you block it?
Just saying, I want to prove it. I mean, the one thing that should come out of all of this is that the governor of New Jersey is a very powerful guy, and you can't do anything in New Jersey that the governor doesn't want you to do. And that's not me. That's historic. That's the way the state is structured. And so, if the governor wants something, he can usually get it. If he doesn't want something, he can usually block it.
Is that a good thing to
Sure.
invest that much power in one person?
Sure.
Why?
But first of all, if he abuses it, the public catches on right away. And you know, although you're powerful, you got to be powerful in doing the right things. If you're powerful in doing the wrong things, you lose the public pretty quickly. And so, you know, you go into office, you want to get things done, you can get them done. If you want to get bad things done, they're going to give you a hard time because you're the focus. And as the focus, you have the responsibility and you get the reaction. So when I say the governor is the most powerful, he can get the right things done. And the right things done is good for New Jersey.
Tell me about the Tox Island controversy.
Tox Island was basically a dam project, which was to be done by concurrence of 4 states: New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And it was sponsored really in New Jersey by Congressman Thompson, who thought that Tox Island would be the long-range solution to our water problem.
The dam would have been up in northwestern New Jersey, across from Pennsylvania.
Right. And it would back into a huge reservoir. It had a lot going for it. The idea of having a water supply for New Jersey for long range was basically a very attractive idea. The negative of it was, first of all, that it would take a nice piece of New Jersey that we love and put it underwater. We got enough of New Jersey underwater as it is. But it also had logistic problems in that the water was quite polluted. We all talked about there were chicken farmers dumping
The Delaware River?
Yeah, mostly in New York, dumping stuff, and we didn't have a ready solution to that. And the environmental community was violently against building the dam and the reservoir under those circumstances. So we looked at it, and we looked at it pretty carefully. I was of two minds on it, frankly, and still think that if we could have done it right, it might have been the thing to do. But we had a meeting of the governors of those 4 states, and frankly, they said to me, "This is mostly your problem. You solve it, and we'll vote with you." And we had that meeting in Newark, and early on, and I decided we shouldn't do it. We didn't.
What, you say you were of two minds. Do you remember what swayed you?
The fact that we couldn't solve the environmental problems, and that the other thing was that there was a concept of building minor reservoirs along the Delaware, which could also be used for pump storage, and that was going to go a long way to solving some of the water shortage problem. Not sure we built as many of those off-site reservoirs as we should have. Nor have we done with the water supply what we should be doing.
We don't hear about water supply as an issue.
We only hear of water supply when we don't have water, and we only hear of floods when it rains. And when the flood dries up, we go on to something else. We don't have long-range planning in New Jersey where I think that's one issue currently that we ought to be looking at. Is long-range planning in power, in water, and droughts. We're not doing it the way we should be.
During your first term, while we're talking about an environmental issue, during your first term you also adopted a 90-day deadline for permit reviews. Why?
Yeah. Well, because it's a frustrating thing. The one criticism I think every governor has heard when running for election is that you can't get things done in New Jersey, and that you apply for a permit, and even today, if you have a 90-day deadline, on the 89th day they will reject your permit application for some technicality and make you start over, and then 90 days runs again. And then I'm not running the state now. I tried to have an environmental commissioner who could respond and get decisions out, and I think has some success at that. And in the old days, the governor could call up an environmental commissioner and say, "Hey, I've heard that this thing is pending. Would you see why it's stuck?" Now, if you did that, you'd be accused of some kind of shenanigans. But it is a problem. Always has been a problem in New Jersey getting permits.
Do you think it worked during your term?
It worked to a large extent during my term, yes.
You also sharply increased the schedule of sewage facility construction. Do you recall that?
Sure, we needed them. We found a way to finance them, and we built them. As a matter of fact, I once made a campaign speech at a sewage facility, and I started off by saying this is the first time I've been able to campaign on my opponent's platform.
Did you do something with the Penal Code in your first term or your second term?
Yes, we revised the Penal Code. Senator Greenberg and Assemblyman Eldridge Hawkins, I think, co-sponsored the bill, or sponsored the bill in the Senate and the Assembly. And I think we modernized the Penal Code. We changed a lot in that Penal Code. Made punishment more relevant to the crime. We eliminated certain crimes, made social gambling not a crime, reduced the penalties for things like marijuana use, put a de minimis statute provision in the statute, which meant that things that were de minimis the judge could dismiss. And by and large, it's hung on for all these years and still is regarded as a workable penal code. Penal code ought to be revised every 30 years or so, and that has been. But we did a pretty good job on it. It was better penal code going into the one I submitted was better than the one that came out. But that's the democratic process.
Was crime a big issue in your day?
Sure. It always
Violent
is.
crime?
It always is. We didn't have the kinds of problems that we're seeing now. But yeah, it's always a problem. You always have to have a good law enforcement arm. I think the fact that the state police, well, even President Nixon helped us with putting more cops on the road. I always gave him credit for that. And
providing funding for it?
Yeah, and the state police, I was always very proud of the fact that Clint Pagano headed the state police for most of my time and was a real pro. I'd love to tell a story about how I appointed him, which was I appointed a committee of 3 people. I won't mention their names, but they came back with recommendations for state police. And I looked at the list and I said, well, you know, why isn't Clint Pagano at least on this list? And they said, the one guy said, well, he's Italian. And so I appointed Clint Pagano, and he was a great superintendent of state police, had the respect of the state police and the public. Without him, I'm not sure I would have done Atlantic City, because I needed strong state police integrity and efficiency to make sure the casinos stayed straight. And there's a credit to the state.
Have we talked about Atlantic City? Did we cover that?
Yeah. We want to take a break?
Yeah.
All right.
We can talk about that while it's fresh.
Okay. Governor, as a Catholic politician, what kind of relations did you have with Catholic leaders in this state? Well,
on election day is one thing, and as on a going kind of concern, it's another thing. The position I took on abortion was that I was personally opposed to it, but that I respected a woman's right to choose. That's a position a lot of Catholic politicians take, and the church is totally against that position and so forth. Now, in 1973, when I ran, the abortion issue was not quite what it became afterward, and I took basically that that position. And the Sunday before election in '73, there were, I understand, 2 million leaflets distributed at every Catholic church in the state, telling people not to vote for me. I worried about that. It apparently did not affect my vote. I won by, what, 700,000 or something like that. So as an issue, it didn't seem to be one that would affect an election. And now I have to deal with the church. And the Catholic Church in New Jersey has been run by a great group of leaders and leaders who understood that I was a governor, and that they had different opinions. They didn't have to support me, but they had to work with me, and we worked well, and you know, we helped where we could with Catholic position. I would have an annual conference down in Long Branch of the religious leaders from basically the 3 major religions in New Jersey. And
Which were? What were the 3?
We were Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, or as Tommy Smith would say, Quaker. But we would sit around for a whole morning, and we would discuss issues which were concerned with people of all religions. I mean, and I think the leadership of all of those religions respected, you know, my view, and whether they agree with it or not, we work together. The abortion is not the only issue you have with religious leaders. There are a number of issues. Some of them economic issues. With the Jewish community, we had kosher enforcement issues. A number of the Protestant groups were more interested in the death penalty issue.
Where were you on the death penalty?
I was always against the death penalty.
And there was no death penalty in the '70s in New Jersey?
There wasn't a death penalty because when I was a judge, I declared it unconstitutional.
You did?
I did. State versus White. That was, the Chief Justice Wanchop was upset that I did that. Because he called me one time, he says, you know, how dare you, you're a trial judge? Based on a 3-sentence opinion of the United States Supreme Court, you declared in New Jersey.
Do you recall what year that might have been?
Well, it's probably 71. State versus White, it's there. How dare you, based on a 3-sentence opinion? And I said, tell me, Chief, I said, how long does an opinion of the Supreme Court have to be before I'm obliged to follow it? And he didn't like that. And when he affirmed that decision, he affirmed it based on another case. He just, and by the way, he was really one of my best friends, the Chief Justice, and closest friends. And I would seek his advice all the time.
Yeah, you told us in an earlier interview that you admired him.
But anyway,
above all.
I did. I declared it unconstitutional. When I was governor, I vetoed the death penalty when the legislature passed it at least 3 times.
Really?
And it wasn't until Tom Kean became governor that it was reinstated. And they would have been better off to leave it my way.
They haven't used it since
I haven't used it.
1982.
It's a very expensive proposition to try to enforce. And the justices of the Supreme Court who retire and tell you are just as happy that they didn't have to enforce it.
Do you recall who was the Archbishop of Newark when you were governor?
I'll think of it.
Garrity?
Who?
Garrity?
It may have been Garrity, but I think there was somebody even before Garrity. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. It may have been Boland even.
Did anybody in your...
I had a great relationship with those bishops, though. And I remember also with, I got to know the cardinal in New York, who was, I think, Spellman at the time. Cook, Cardinal Cook. And Cardinal Kroll in Philadelphia. We got along famously, Cardinal Kroll. And when the Pope came, Cardinal Kroll made sure I met him, had my picture taken with him. He would call me, and he would insist on calling me Your Excellency, which I realized called for the protocol that I called him Your Eminence. And so we had a great time, even though he was much more conservative than I was.
Did your good relations with the bishops cause them to press you for aid to parochial and private schools?
Well, where we could. I mean, there were things that we could do. I remember somehow we got them some money to repair the roof of the cathedral in Newark. And if we could help them in any way that was constitutional, we'd be happy to try. And they knew that.
Tell us the story about your plane trip to the Vatican.
Oh, that was in 1980. I was part of the United States delegation to the investiture of John Paul I, the so-called 30-day Pope. And I went over with Walter Mondale, who headed the delegation. And it was an interesting trip because of all of the circumstances. There was an interesting group of delegates from the United States, almost all of whom were elected officials and almost all of whom were defeated on the next election. It's pure coincidence. Anyway, we went over there, and Bob Torricelli was then working for Mondale, so he got me nicely positioned, got me as part of, we had maybe a 20-people delegation, but only 5 or 6 of us sat in the special section. And I was one of those, and I had to be fitted for tails and so forth when we got over there. It was an interesting experience, and I still have that commemorated on my wall.
What was your experience with Jimmy Carter, who became president while you were still in your first term? I
was allegedly the first governor in the United States to support Jimmy Carter for president. I brought him into Princeton to lecture or to speak to the Whig Clio Society in Princeton, a student organization. He spoke the night after Lloyd Benson spoke, and made a better impression than Lloyd Benson. And I always thought that was significant in putting him into the mix. I had a little party for him at Morven. I raised some money for him early on. He credited me with being an early supporter. Worked closely, helped him in the campaign. He lost New Jersey, by the way, electoral votes. But we became friendly. We were very close to his staff. Marilyn Berry Thompson was running my Washington office. And a real pro, by the way, not a political appointment. She had worked for my predecessor, and so that was not somebody. Anyway, she was good. She was good. Noted for slipping memos under my door when we were going out on conferences. I'd wake up in the morning and look for her memo. Anyway, Carter and I were very close. I did things for him when he became president.
Like what?
Like developed an urban policy for him. I had Marilyn Thompson working in the White House for a couple of months, working on urban policy. We helped draft some bills. And then, after a lot of work, by the way, Carter called me one day and said, we can't afford this policy. And so we had to walk away from it after I actually testified on a couple of bills. And everybody I think thinks that the trouble with Carter is that he didn't have the passion for any program. Anyway, I got along fine with him. I was talking the other day about the fact that in 1976, when he's running for the nomination, the convention was in New York at the Americana Hotel. And he calls me 2 nights before his acceptance speech, when he has to designate as vice president. And he invited me and I think 4 other governors. The only one I really remember was Jimmy Hunt from North Carolina, to come up and have breakfast with him. This was the morning of, it was just like a Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, so maybe it was Tuesday morning. I think it was Wednesday. Anyway, we sit down and have breakfast, and he says, I have narrowed the selection of a vice presidential candidate to 2 men, Walter Mondale and Ed Muskie, and I want your opinion as to where I should go. And my first comment was, I can't believe it. This is the day before you got to announce this, and you haven't made that decision. He said, no, I want your opinion. And my opinion was that Mondale would do better in New Jersey than Muskie. I'm not sure why, but I thought he was a little more liberal for New Jersey. Anyway, that's the kind of rapport I had with Jimmy Carter. When he had that crisis of confidence, what was that?
The malaise speech.
Yeah. He called 4 or 5 of us down to Camp David. And I was one of the governors he called. And I remember when I got down there, he showed me to my cottage. And he said, this is the same cottage I gave to Sadat when he was here. And I said, which bed did Mrs. Sadat? She wasn't there, it turned out. But anyway, that's the kind of rapport I had with him, and I participated in those discussions.